Logic was added, reasoning, and premises to make arguments the best. But suddenly, something worse happened. Fallacies fell in it and ruined our life. But then came the critical thinkers.
Hello people, I'm Ruma Kadri from Ahmedabad University and I'm here to talk about the naturalistic fallacy. Before understanding the naturalistic fallacy, it is very important to know the is-ought gap. So what exactly is this gap? We all know that there are fundamentally two different types of statements. The descriptive statement, which shows how the world is, and the prescriptive statement, which shows how the world should be. So basically, the is-ought gap is inferring a prescriptive statement from the descriptive statement. Let me explain you with a brief example. Say for example, the sky is dark, so you ought to take your umbrella with you. Here, the sky is dark is a descriptive statement. It describes the sky. Whereas, you ought to take your umbrella with you is a prescriptive statement. It claims what you ought to do. You can clearly see that the prescriptive statement has been deduced from the description of the sky. The gap between the first and the second statement is the is-ought gap. The first statement is a description and the second statement is a deduction which has been derived from the description given about the sky. This gap between the first and the second statement is the is-ought gap. Naturalistic fallacy is basically using the is-ought gap in arguments to make them sound valid. Let us take a look at a few examples to make it more clear. Say for example, Jack is tall, so he ought to be a basketball player. Here, Jack is tall is a descriptive statement and he ought to be tall is a prescriptive statement which has been inferred from the description given about Jack. It has been concluded just on the basis of the description given about Jack. So Jack is tall, so he should be a basketball player. It is clearly a fallacious argument. Let me give you another example. So, tendency to conflict in human instinct is only natural. So, war ought to be good for mankind. Again, committing the naturalistic fallacy because it is clearly deduced that war should be good for mankind because tendency to conflict in human instinct is natural. On the basis of the description given about human instincts and the tendency to conflict, it has been concluded, that war should be good for mankind or war ought to be good for mankind. It is again clearly a fallacious argument. You might also have heard people say that, I bought this product because it says 100% natural and so it ought to be better than the rest. So the person here is committing the naturalistic fallacy because, my product is 100% natural is the description of the product, whereas it ought to be natural is a prescriptive statement which has been deduced from the description. The person here is directly drawing a conclusion that because the product is 100% natural according to the description, so it ought to be better than the rest. Of course, the naturalistic fallacy, right? The famous proverb, all that glitters is gold, is also a very nice example of naturalistic fallacy because when you say all that glitters is gold, you mean that, whatever glitters is and must be gold. So, describing something that, something is glittering and on the basis of that you're concluding that it is and must be gold. So, inferring a prescriptive statement from the basis of a description that, all that glitters is and must be gold. So, naturalistic fallacy again. Let me give you another example. Say, feeling envy is only natural, so there should be nothing wrong with feeling envy. Again, naturalistic fallacy people, describing that something should be okay just because of the description given about it. There is a clear conclusion drawn that, because feeling envy is natural, there should be nothing wrong with feeling envy. It is clearly committing the naturalistic fallacy again. Let me give you one more example to make the topic more clear. Say, only women are capable of getting pregnant, so the men should not be given the responsibility of changing the diapers. Here, on the basis of the description given about the women, a conclusion is drawn that men should not be given the responsibility of changing the diapers. Again, naturalistic fallacy, a clear conclusion is drawn just on the basis of the description given about the women, that women are only women are capable of giving birth to children, so men should not be responsible for changing the diapers of the babies. Another example. Yeah, so smoking pot does not harm anybody, so it should not be illegal for adults to smoke pot. This is clearly, naturalistic fallacy because a conclusion is drawn from the description of smoking pot. Smoking pot does not harm anybody is a descriptive statement, whereas it should not be illegal for adults to smoke pot is a prescriptive statement which has been inferred from the description of smoking pot. A direct conclusion is drawn from the description that it does not harm anybody, so it should not be illegal for adults to smoke pot. It is clearly committing the naturalistic fallacy. You will notice that whenever the discussion of naturalistic fallacy is going on, a name always pops up, which is the name of G.E. Moore. He was an English philosopher and he wrote a book called Principia Ethica in which he has talked about naturalistic fallacy. It clearly states that whenever philosophers try to define the term good reductively in terms of natural properties like pleasant or desirable, they are committing the naturalistic fallacy. The philosophers there are committing the naturalistic fallacy. I'll tell you why. Because whenever you try to define the term good as pleasant or desirable, you are trying to say that whatever is good is and must be pleasant, or whatever is good is and must be desirable. Just because something is good, you are deducing that it should be pleasant, it should be desirable. On the basis of its description, you are drawing a conclusion like this. It is clearly committing the naturalistic fallacy. Though good and pleasant might, in some situations, describe the same object, but the quality attributed to them should not be the same. Because good and pleasant are clearly not the same in all situations. The definition of good is different from person to person, object to object, or situation to situation. It is quite subjective. Therefore, saying that because something is good, it should be pleasant, or because something is good, it is and must be desirable, is clearly committing a naturalistic fallacy. You might also have heard people say that the other way around, that whatever is pleasant is and must be good. Say, for example, people who smoke cigarettes, a person might say that, smoking cigarettes gives me pleasure, so it should be good for my health. Naturalistic fallacy again. Just because something gives pleasure to him or to his mind, he is deducing from it that, it should be good for his health on the basis of the description of smoking cigarettes, that it gives pleasure to his mind. He is clearly drawing a conclusion from that, it should be good for his health. It is obviously a fallacious argument. You might also, have heard a person say that, eating more slices of pizza gives me pleasure, so it ought to be good for my health, or it ought to be good for me. The person here is again committing a naturalistic fallacy. Because something gives him pleasure does not mean that it is good for his health or it is good for him. So, deducing that because something is pleasant, it is and must be good for his health or for himself is committing the naturalistic fallacy. Again, he's deducing that because eating pizza gives him pleasure, so it should be good for his health. It ought to be good for his health. So, he is committing the naturalistic fallacy again. Let me give you some more examples on naturalistic fallacy. For example, a person who opposes homosexuality, to support his opposition, he might put forward an argument such as, homosexuality is unnatural, so it should be unacceptable or it should be undesirable. Here the person is clearly committing the naturalistic fallacy. He is deducing or drawing the conclusion, that because homosexuality is unnatural, it should be unacceptable. Just on the basis of the description given about homosexuality, that it is unnatural, he is inferring that it should be unacceptable, it ought to be undesirable. Naturalistic fallacy, again, people. Let me give you one more example to make the topic crystal clear. Say, for example, a person who opposes veganism, you might say, that early men, when they used to exist, they used to feed on animal meat, as their food. So God might have intended that to be a unnatural diet. And what pagans prescribe as a diet is unnatural. So veganism is unnatural and so it ought to be unacceptable. Again, committing the naturalistic fallacy, he is deducing that because something is unnatural, it should be unacceptable or it should be undesirable. This is clearly a fallacious argument, and the person here is committing the naturalistic fallacy because he is deducing a conclusion on the basis of a description given about the subject. You might have noticed that all these arguments that I gave as examples consisted of a premises as well as a claim. Well, in naturalistic fallacy, all the arguments, the premises of these arguments are generally facts or common beliefs, whereas the claim is, a conclusion drawn from these premises. In naturalistic fallacy, mostly the claim is irrelevant because it is just a clear deduction from the premises which is stated formerly. In naturalistic fallacy, the common beliefs or the common facts are used as a tool to put forward the claim in a way that sounds valid, that which sounds more acceptable. So, naturalistic fallacy is mainly presenting arguments in this way. There is a common problem in understanding the naturalistic fallacy. People often mistake it to be the same as a fallacy called appeal to nature fallacy. Well, appeal to nature fallacy is a fallacy wherein prescriptive statements are inferred on the basis of two specific kinds of descriptive statements. The first one being whatever is natural is and must be good, and the second one, whatever is unnatural is and must be bad. Or be it the other way around, saying whatever is good is and must be natural, and whatever is bad is and must be unnatural. Let me give you an example to make it more clear. Yeah. So heavy rains are natural, so it ought to be good for us. The person here is clearly deducing that rains ought to be good for us because they are natural. He is deducing the prescriptive statement on the basis that something is natural, so it must and should be good. So heavy rains are natural, so they ought to be good for us. The fallacy committed here is appeal to nature fallacy. Well, it can also be said that the person here is committing the naturalistic fallacy because the person is deducing something on the basis of a description given about the subject, that something is natural, the description that heavy rains are natural. So the person is deducing that heavy rains ought to be good for us, a direct deduction from a description, also the naturalistic fallacy. Let me give you another example to make the fallacy appeal to nature more clear. So say for example a person says that cocaine is all natural, so it ought to be good for us. The person here is definitely presenting a fallacious argument. The fallacy here is appeal to nature fallacy because the person is inferring that cocaine ought to be good for us because of the descriptive statement that whatever is natural is all good, is must be good, and cocaine is all natural, so it ought to be good for us. So it's deducing that cocaine is all natural, so it ought to be good for us. The fallacy here is definitely the fallacy appeal to nature. You might also think that the fallacy here also might be naturalistic fallacy. Well, you are true because the person here is directly deducing a prescriptive statement from a description of cocaine. Cocaine is all natural, so it ought to be good for us. The person is deriving a conclusion on the basis of a description. So the fallacy here is also the naturalistic fallacy. As I said earlier, appeal to nature is a fallacy wherein conclusions are drawn on the basis of two and only two statements, which are whatever is natural is and must be good, and whatever is unnatural is and must be bad. So there are very many things in this world which are all natural and not good for anybody besides cocaine, like earthquakes or monsoons or viruses, just to name a few, which are not good for anybody in spite of being all natural. They are not beneficial to anybody. Whereas things like aspirin or pacemakers or surgery are all unnatural things, though they are beneficial or good for everybody in spite of being all unnatural. Appeal to nature is a fallacy wherein arguments are made using these two statements as a tool, to present the arguments as valid arguments. Well, the arguments are 100% fallacious. From these examples and the explanation, we can see that appeal to nature and naturalistic fallacy are not completely the same. Appeal to nature is a fallacy wherein conclusions are drawn on the basis of two specific kinds of descriptive statements, whereas naturalistic fallacy is a fallacy wherein conclusions are drawn on the basis of any kind of descriptive statements, nothing specific. So we can conclude that appeal to nature is more like a part of naturalistic fallacy than being completely the same as naturalistic fallacy. So don't get confused, people. So that's all about naturalistic fallacy. I hope I was able to explain you the concept well and clear, and I hope you don't make any deductions which are irrelevant of this kind using these common beliefs and common facts. So thank you for watching the video patiently. Thank you.